Hey there, it's Simon Mannering. I'm the CEO and founder of WeFirst, and I really appreciate you spending some time, especially on a Monday morning. I hope some of us got to watch the Oscars last night, maybe some of us older crowd, and the younger ones will just kind of look on Insta to see what happened. But I hope everyone's well, and forgive me if I sound a little blocked up today, got a bit of a cold. But I'm the CEO and founder of WeFirst, and we're a creative consultancy that builds purpose-driven brands. And I wanted to do something a little bit different today. I wanted to do a webinar about something a little bit more personal. And I'll tell you the reason. We all get to go to a lot of conferences, and invariably, sometimes I'm speaking there or on panels and things like that, but it's always the conversations in the corridor, the very sort of personal, vulnerable conversations in the corridor with friends and colleagues that really always strike me that a lot of us are really searching for purpose in our lives, personal purpose, and to make sense of exactly why they get out of bed in the morning, why you do what you do, and how you make sure that your life has meaning. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that more in a sort of fireside chat way today than slides and presentation materials, because I think it's much more sensitive than that. And so the topic of today's webinar is, a one-on-one on how to find your personal purpose in life. And if you have any questions, please just go down to the chat box, click on the chat box there and enter your questions, and I'll see them, because I'd really like to dedicate as much of this as possible to answering any particular questions that you might have. And you don't necessarily have to use your name or anything like that, but if you're struggling to get clarity around what your purpose is, yet you feel like you'd like to better understand how to best use your time, then I'd love to help, just based on the experience that we've had. And just in terms of that experience, WeFirst works with companies that are purpose-driven. And as part of that work, we work with a lot of executives, CEOs, senior execs, and we do a lot of personal purpose work just to help them understand how they bring their best and highest selves to the work they do at the office. All of this that I'm going to share with you today is really just based on doing this with folks for real, and those who have as many competing interests and challenges in their lives as we all do. And so I hope that this will be very, very valuable to you. And again, please enter any questions you have in the chat box below, so I can make sure I use the time to answer your questions rather than sort of just pontificate from the front here. I have to admit that I stumbled into this whole area very clumsily. I started off my sort of professional career in Australia as a lawyer, and then transitioned into advertising when someone said, "Oh, you should be a copywriter." And I thought, "Oh, what do you mean?" And I thought they must have been copyright law, but they actually meant copywriter. And so I spent time at DDB and Saatchi & Saatchi in Sydney, and then Saatchi & Saatchi and Liga Stellani in London, and then went across and worked on Nike at Wieden & Kennedy, and then finally was worldwide creative director on Motorola at Ogilvy here in LA, which is where we are today. And that was my circuitous journey, looking for, I have to say in hindsight, the right version of success. I think all of us, especially when we're younger, are trying to, at different stages of our life, identify that version of success that either is going to feel most fulfilling to us or unconsciously meet the approval of others. I certainly had no idea what I was going to do when I left university. I was completely clueless. And so in the absence of some clear direction, you spend all your time trying all these different things. And the funny old thing for me was that, having been lucky enough to work at Wieden & Kennedy on the Nike brand, and you win shiny statues and go to the Cannes Art Festival and so on, I wasn't happy, and I didn't quite know why. And I couldn't really put my finger on it. I just was unsettled. And so I moved to Los Angeles. Actually, my wife said, "I'm moving to Los Angeles, feel free to come," because we'd have 10 years of rain, 4 years in London, 4.5 years in Portland. And she was like, "I need to get some sunshine." So as a wise husband, came down to LA, and then I had a big job where, you're in charge of a global piece of business, and you have lots of meetings that only start when you walk in the room, and to some that might look like success. You are important in inverted commas. But again, I felt unfulfilled, and it was really unsettling. I was like in my late 30s with 2 young kids. And especially when you've really gone to the effort of moving around the world and going to countries where you don't know anybody, when you finally get to some sort of level of success, you'd hope that you feel successful. You'd hope that you feel good about what you're doing on a daily basis. And I didn't. And, over the last, 10 years, as I've talked to people, come across lots and lots of folks that really struggle with what they're doing on a daily basis. And so I left after doing the last staff job at Motorola, and I became a freelancer, and I kept myself interested by this sort of breathless brand triage where I'd go in and work with brands for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it was, in a freelance capacity. And it was the urgency of that that kept me interested. Yet after 5 or 6 years of that, again, I was sort of scratching my head. And I don't know if any of you watching this webinar feel the same way, where you're like, I don't know what's wrong. I can't put my finger on it, but it's showing up in ways I don't like. Just this dialogue inside my head, or my frustration that I share with my partner, or just being irritable when you're not quite sure why. I mean, for me, I found I spent a lot of time worrying about what other people were doing. Should I be doing what they're doing? Why are they more successful? How come they've worked out what they should be doing and I haven't? And I actually found it to be a pretty dark, negative energy. And I think that can take you so far in life. I think, you can want to outcompete and destroy and, crush others, as you sometimes hear. But it is a dark energy, and I'm not sure that it's the most productive energy either for you or for others, because I think it sort of inhabits you with, a negativity where even when you do have success, you're still struggling as to why you're not happy, because it's a negative energy. And so, there I was living in Los Angeles, and was walking around my backyard, and, I hadn't really talked to my wife or kids about it, but I was just unhappy or unfulfilled. I didn't know why I wasn't challenged or fulfilled. And as luck would have it in life, there was a sudden turn of events where I walked into my kitchen at the time where we had an answering machine on the countertop, and there was 5 messages on the answering machine. One from my mother, another from my mother, one from my sister, one from my mother, and a final one from my mother that said, "Simon, Dad died. Call us when you wake up." And it was a really powerful experience in having a pretty intense emotional journey collapsed into 5 messages, because they were over time. They were spaced throughout the evening, because my mum was calling from Sydney, and she was calling Los Angeles, and our bedroom was too far away for me to hear. But then when you walk into the kitchen, bed hair and boxer shorts on, and you just hear them butted up against each other. And that really struck me. And I walked into the bedroom and said to my wife, Dad's died, and I have to go and go to the funeral and so on. And, in hindsight, as tragic as it was an incredibly liberating experience, I guess, in a sense, because it was the first time in my life I was so discombobulated, so professionally and personally at sea, that I got out of my own way. What do I mean by that? So often I find we retreat to our heads to make us feel safe. We're not sure if we want to take a risk. We're not sure what the answer is to a certain question, whether it be your purpose or otherwise. And so we try and make ourselves safe by rationalizing it, by making sense of it, by thinking in linear terms. And it was the first time in my life where I was so kind of unchallenged or unsure professionally, and then really unsettled emotionally, to just sort of see what showed up. And it wasn't a good period of time. It was a very sort of sad period of time, obviously. But it's interesting. I think there's a lot of signposts or guideposts inside of us instinctively that show up when we get out of our own way and we don't retreat to our head. And it just so happened that 2 weeks after that happened, I happened to read the speech that Bill Gates gave at the World Economic Forum, his creative capitalism speech. This was 2008, that he later gave on the floor of the General Assembly of the United Nations, where he basically said the private sector's got to play a bigger role in social change. And that really struck a chord for me. I think I was looking for something, in hindsight, more meaningful and higher order. And I'd been very, very struck by the power of storytelling, working on Nike and a global piece of business like Motorola. And there we were, at the height of the sort of global economic meltdown. And I thought, well, what could we do if we applied this powerful tool of storytelling to help business be a positive impact, have a positive impact? And so that was the beginning of a very happenstance journey. Like I remember reading in the garage the speech that Bill Gates gave and sort of dismissing it, but then, you know, struggling to dismiss it because it was like, well, he even called it creative capitalism. It was sort of like a creative brief. And I think if any of us know when something sparks inside you, you sort of try and walk away from it and it stays with you and you can't help thinking about it. And you start scribbling down things and ideas start showing up and you're like, oh, damn, here we go. This is something. And I think for many of us, there is so much demands on our time. We are so caught up in the acute spiraling energy of life and all that social media does in our lives. We don't get time to step back and allow something to show up. And so if you're struggling or at least hoping to find your purpose, one of the key things I would say is to allow whatever's true inside you to reveal itself. And I know that can sound a little lofty or woo-woo, but that was my direct experience. So that's all I know. And the way you do that is not try and have the answer. You actually have the intention to get some clarity around this issue, but then let what shows up, shows up. And if you might ask yourself, well, why is this so important? I have to say that the absence of a clear sense of purpose made me unhappier, but it also made me less of the man, the husband, the father that I wanted to be, because I think all of us would like us to be in alignment with who we are. So what we do on a daily basis is aligned with who we are. And one of the most powerful gifts that I've found in doing this sort of work is that a lot of what might otherwise distract you or take your attention falls away. So that worry I talked about earlier on about what others are doing, or should I be doing what they're doing, or how they come to making more money. When you actually find something that's meaningful to you, then all of that drops away. And I have to say, in terms of my mental energy, it was like a gift of like 30% back, as I wasn't spiraling out, always thinking and wondering through these things. And I especially found this to be true. I think a lot of us guys are very aggressively competitive, and we very rarely stop to reflect on, how we might best use our time. And that's not to generalize about guys, but, I think men and women are equally competitive, but sometimes there's a dark competitive energy with men that compounds this problem. And at the same time, as I understand it, a lot of research shows a lot of men are lonely, especially in their professional lives, and they aren't encouraged, reinforced, or given environments in which they can think about what they really want to be doing with their time. And I think ultimately that's very, very costly, because, we're not here forever, and you do want to look back and say, hey, I have lived a life that's left a legacy that was meaningful to me. So, this can take many different forms, whether it's a holiday or whether it's a moment of reflection or whether it's, a routine and meditation and so on. But in all the discussions I've had with a lot of folks out there in terms of finding their purpose and so on, they're not looking for something outside themselves. It's already living and breathing within them. And it reveals itself in the most unlikely ways. And the most powerful or most effective way to get there is to get out of your own way. And it's not surprising, I think, for any of us that we're our own worst enemy in some of these circumstances. So, I'd encourage you to take the time to prioritize it. I'm not constantly struck. My wife and I have two daughters, 19 and 16, who are awesome. And no one ever teaches kids at school about this sort of thing. They never talk about, what sort of life they want to lead, what's important to them, how to most meaningfully give their gifts. And I think many of us come to it too late. I think for me, it was a function of having kids and being committed to something higher than myself. I think the other thing that we all struggle with is that we don't want to lean into whatever shows up, in that we don't trust that we're enough. And I think one of the things that I've discovered, I mean, I've been lucky enough to do a bunch of speeches around the world and meet some people that others might consider famous on the business circuit and so on. And the one thing that strikes me is these people have risen to the top of their professions and seem to be living effective lives of purpose, is they are 100% themselves. And I think the starting point for getting there is to trust that you're enough. You know, you don't need to live somebody else's version of success. You don't need to validate yourself through somebody else's benchmark. It's simply not necessary and not relevant. And in fact, I'd say almost the opposite is true, which is that, you know, the more you commit to being your true and authentic self, the further you'll get more quickly. And typically, I've spoken to many people that have found that when they do this sort of work and they get out of their own way and they allow it to show up, there's a moment of epiphany where they're like, oh my God, this is what I care about. In my case, I started blogging and certain themes emerged. I was always talking about business, and I was always talking about collective interests, and I was always talking about the positive impact that business could have. And I had no desire to do anything around that beforehand, no interest to write a book, none of these sorts of things. But these themes slowly emerged. And the larger point I'd make here, the second point would be that it's hard to read the label from inside the jar. And you need to externalize yourself. And so when I talk about taking time to reflect or to do some sort of a practice or to get out of your own way, it's important to capture what shows up and to do that over a period of time so that you can see what themes emerge. And again, these are those hidden signposts within yourself that most people either don't have the time or don't give the priority to listen to. But these are your truth in a way. These are your truth. It was interesting. I was lucky enough to go to Necker Island and spend some time with Richard Branson and do some training with some CEOs out there. And the one thing that struck me about Richard Branson, 100%, is that he's a family guy through and through. He's been quoted in the press saying, you know, I've been fighting for my family for 40 years and we kill for each other. You know, he's a deeply passionate family man. And that shows up in his work and the relatedness with colleagues in all his companies, because he extends to them the type of relatedness that's usually reserved for family. But that's not unusual. That's not rocket science. But he has brought that to life in such a powerful way through his companies. There was a period in 2015 where, as part of a project we first was doing, I was the interim CMO at Tom's and got to spend some time with Blake Makowski, who's a great guy. And it was interesting. We were in a brand council meeting that day, one of those days back then. And I asked Blake and I said, well, why did you start the company? And he paused for a minute and he said, well, I didn't want to start a company. I wanted to get some shoes on that kid's feet. And, you know, I think what I realized in that moment was Blake's enemy was apathy. What he hated was this idea that we can't do anything about it, that we can't leverage business to address these seemingly intractable problems. And his great asset was empathy. You know, if Richard Branson was a family guy and, you know, Blake has deep empathy. And these are just my opinions. It's not them. They didn't confirm this or others. It's just my experience of them. And I got to tell you, when you do this sort of work and you sort of distill down what are these fundamental traits, these defining qualities of you, and then think about, well, how you can apply your skill set to those things, something miraculous happens. There's some very, very powerful serendipity that shows up. Again, at the risk of sounding woo-woo, you know, people will come into your life, opportunities will open up that seem unimaginable before, but it's because you've stepped into whatever your truth is. And you can imagine, it's not surprising that when you're starting to live a life that's in alignment with who you are, opportunities that seem super exciting that otherwise wouldn't there would appear. It was interesting. Before the book came out, I wrote a book called We First, and it took 3 years to write the book. And I was kindly offered the opportunity to do a TEDx San Francisco talk 3 days before the book came out. And I was exhausted. I mean, I'd spent all the money I didn't have on a publicist, which was or wasn't worthwhile. I had been, working full time and working around the clock doing final edits on the book and all those sorts of things. I was absolutely knackered, as we say in Australia. And so when this call came in like 2 weeks before the TEDx San Francisco, I was like, no, I'm exhausted. All I want to do is lie down and cry at the bottom of a swimming pool so no one can see my tears. And then I thought, oh, well, I've got to do something. I have to promote this book. I mean, how else? Otherwise, I spent 3 years writing it and it's not going to get out there. And so I asked myself, I sat down and I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to promote this book? I've got no money. I don't know people on TV shows. I don't have any of those sorts of things. And I asked myself, what am I trying to do with this book? Because it's, 250, 270 pages all about sustainable capitalism and social media and so on. And I realized that I was trying to put new words in the mouth of business. New words. Because words frame behavior. They codify behavior. And if we can give ourselves new language, it can help accelerate new behaviors that'll have a greater positive impact on more people. And so I called up a guy who I had never met, didn't know, someone just mentioned his name, gave me his number, called Sekou Andrews, who was a spoken word poet, extraordinary gentleman, truly gifted, has opened for TED and Harvard and so many others. Talked to him on the phone. He's like, who's this random Australian calling up asking what? And he said he would work with me on creating a video to launch the, to launch the book on this TEDx talk. And then I called up a music house that I'd worked with, Machine Head, and they threw their hat in the ring. And then I called up a design company that I'd worked with called Troika Design, and they threw their hat in the ring. And over the next 2 weeks, we pulled together a video, and none of them charged a cent. They just believed in what the book was trying to achieve. And I gave the last 3 minutes of the TED Talk to that video, and it was shared 40,000 times over that weekend, and then the book was on the New York Times bestseller list. I only share that because none of that was possible without stepping off whatever cliff I stepped off onto to kind of write the book and to pick up the phone and to call people and to kind of lean into what was unique to me, what I was passionate about. But the absolute same is possible for you. Time and again over the last 10 years, I've had people share with me stories of just serendipity where something opened up or something happened where they're like, I can't believe this is even possible. And it's only because they sort of lent into themselves and they gave themselves the opportunity. And, again, at the risk of sounding woo, they sort of let the universe do its magic and bring people and opportunities into your life that weren't there. And again, all of this is a function of stepping aside and taking time to prioritize these questions, and then recognizing that you can't read the label from inside the jar. You do need to externalize yourself by writing down, as a function of these moments of time you set aside, what shows up and why. And in my experience, you'll eventually land on something where someone goes, well, of course that's you. Your significant other, partner, lover, whatever, will be like, of course that's you. And that's because they've got that outside perspective. They can see. And, I think ultimately happiness is that alignment between who you are and what you do on a daily basis. So you might say, well, that all sounds great, but what questions do I ask myself? If I'm going to go through this process and prioritize it, what do I do? Just sit there and wait for somebody to show up? And I think there's some very powerful questions you can ask that we've used in our work with brands and executives that we've found very effective. One of those questions is, what are you the only of? What are you the only of? I would argue that Blake McCoskey was the only of a guy who had sufficient empathy to actually commit his life to a business model that translated into the Tom's business. So what are you the only of? The second question I would encourage you to ask yourself is, what is your enemy? What is your enemy? If you think about it, Tesla's enemy is unsustainable mass transportation. Uber's enemy is taxis. Airbnb's enemy is, the homogenous hotel experience. But the same is true on a personal level. Like my enemy I got to tell you, it was weird being in the advertising game for a long time, like 15, 20 years, because, you know, at various times it was arguably cool, especially if you're working on a cool brand like Nike and so on. But I was never felt comfortable with that. I was actually much more of just a family guy, a values-based guy, but I had to kind of get out of my own way to step into that. And so, you know, the way that manifested was my enemy was looking around at the global economic meltdown and saying, this is not okay. You know, what was going on Wall Street and its effect on Main Street and our health and our healthcare and our hopes and our homes and Greece and Iceland and the Gulf states and all around the world, it really pissed me off. And so when you're asking the second question, what is your enemy? What is that thing that really gets you out of bed in the morning? What's that thing that really annoys you? What's that thing that's unconscionable to you? What is that thing that you bore people about at dinner parties talking about? What is that thing that you talk to your significant other about, you know, when you're lying in bed at night and you keep bringing it up? What is that thing? Like for me, it was, you know, I was always really struck by the power of storytelling, that you could really, if done correctly, engage people, capture their attention, get them to behave and do certain things, whether it's buy a pair of Nikes or, you know, march for something they believe in. It was the power of storytelling. And I felt like, you know, we live at a time where government is gridlocked by partisanship and NGOs, nonprofits and foundations can only do so much. And there's this big, fat, hairy elephant in the room called business that up till now has been getting away with murder, that has been unaccountable in terms of its impact on the environment, the way it makes its product, the cost to our health and to our land and our future, and so on and so on. And obviously that's changing rapidly now. But that was the thing that really incensed me. Like, why is business getting a free pass? That's what I didn't understand. So what is that for you? What is your enemy? What is that thing? Every single one of us has something. It may not be top of mind because that's not what you focus on day in, day out, and today. But what is your enemy? Just think about that for a second. The next question would be, when you're at your best, what are you doing? When you're at your best, what are you doing? There are always those days where you're with your team and you're high-fiving because you just crushed it. Or if you're on your own, you're high-fiving the mirror in the bathroom and hoping no one sees you. But there's always those days where you're in the zone, where you're just completely kind of walking your truth and you connect with people and you get the result you want and you're transformative in the room, whatever you're doing. What is that? When you're at your best, what are you doing? And then the next question, the fourth question would be, what legacy do you want to live on a daily basis? And what I mean by that is, fortunately, more and more these days, especially with those who have extraordinary wealth, they're trying to live their legacy today. They're not waiting till they're about to die and then sort of leave it. But they're putting it to work in a kind of active, proactive, for-profit, entrepreneurial sense now. You know, you've got the Zuckerberg Chans of the world and others out there. And I think, you know, how can we live, how can we lead with our legacy on a daily basis? If that can inform your work, then your work will be that much more fulfilling. You'll be that much happier. You'll be a better partner, parent, friend, colleague, all those different things, because you're living your truth more effectively. So what legacy can you live on a daily basis? So that informs how you approach getting out of bed in the morning and what you do with your time. And then the fifth question I'd say is, how will the world be better because you're in it? You know, I would love to think, with all appropriate modesty, that, you know, my work and the work of We First and the incredible team here will be one small voice in a very large choir of change that will help business transform itself from being baseline responsible to the planet to being an agent of positive transformation at a time when we obviously need it so critically, with climate change, plastics in the ocean, loss of biodiversity, all of these different things going on. And so I think how will the world be better off because you're in it? And one of the hidden benefits of doing this work is that, as I said, a lot of that wasted energy where you overread thinking about what you should be doing in relationship to others and so on, drops away. And you can actually start to show up in a way where people will notice you seem happier. You seem much more aligned. You seemed more evolved in terms of what you're doing with your time. And it's so funny to me. I know I'm probably drinking our own Kool-Aid here a little bit, but if there was something that made you happier, that made you a better partner, that made you a better parent, that made you a better friend, and would give you much greater fulfillment when you look back at the end of your life, why wouldn't you give it the priority it deserves? And I think, like so many things in life, home economics and how to cook, there's lots of things when you're young you just don't get taught that you should get taught. And so this is all about, living to be your best and highest self. And so that's 5 questions that I hope are useful in terms of serving as prompts during this time when you prioritize getting a sense of what your purpose is by externalizing yourself, by asking yourself key questions and respectfully looking at those themes that emerge and then asking yourself, how do you purpose those in a way? How do you apply those in a way with your skill set so there's much greater meaning in how you live your daily life? And so I hope there's context that's a little bit, those insights are useful. I have to be honest and say that I still have a recollection of what my life was like before getting into alignment with a sense of purpose. And the angst and the envy and the negativity and the unhealthy drive and the lack of fulfillment. And I think where it is today feels completely different. And I would want that for everyone. And I think we all deserve that. And so I hope that we prioritize this work as highly as possible, because you can imagine it is a transformative experience in your life. And so I know we've been getting some great questions here, and I want to sort of spend the rest of the time talking. And, please do ask them in strict confidentiality, because, this is a chance for us to be private in public, to be personal with each other. So we've got a question here from Mel. Where do I start? Sometimes it feels overwhelming. Well, I think one good place to start, and I'll just speak to this now and then I'll come back to the question. We put together We First Works, which is an online platform that has 2 courses on it, a course on how to define your personal purpose and a course on how to define your company purpose. And we did that, in all honesty, because, fortunately, we're lucky enough, lots of people come to us, social entrepreneurs, founders, startups, saying, hey, we want that expertise that you've gained working with some of the top purpose brands out there, but obviously we can't afford, expensive consulting fees and that sort of thing. So we took all the learning of the last 7 or 8 years of We First Work, and we put it into a courseware. And, you'll see some comments where people are very happy. I mean, it's a step-by-step action plan, and where you walk out with a purpose statement and a way to activate against it. And so if you look on the personal purpose side, you'll see understanding your purpose gaps, writing your purpose statement, creating your action plan, and carrying your purpose forward. And then you see your company purpose as well, which is assessing your company purpose challenges, aligning on your company's purpose statement, building your company's strategic purpose plan, scaling purpose through culture, and then putting it into action. And, there's workbooks, there's downloadable tools, there's video lessons, influencer tips. And those photos of those folks there you see, we reached out to some of the most expert and insightful folks that we know through our work to share their learning. So the gentleman on the left there in the blue shirt, Jordan, at that time, he was the head of strategy at Tom's. The gentleman on the right in the short sleeve pink shirt, Rick Ridgway, is the head of environmental initiatives at Patagonia. And then you've got Linda of lynda.com, who's an extraordinary entrepreneur and such a leader in every sense. And you've got Jackie and Landre, who are, founders who started their own small companies. So, we wanted to give you all our expertise, but also their expertise in terms of how you navigate and define your purpose. So that's a place to start for sure. But coming back to your question, the first thing to acknowledge is that it's not simple. It's not easy. It's something intangible. It's something elusive. It's something instinctive. And so the most powerful thing you can do at first is give yourself permission to be okay with a messy process. Sometimes, when I have lots and lots of conversations at conferences with folks who are trying to grunt their way through it or force their way through it and so on. But this is that point I made where you want to show up in a certain way. You want to let it emerge rather than try and sort of stare at a blank piece of paper until drops of blood appear on your forehead. It's not how it works. So I would acknowledge that it is a difficult process. Then I would secondly put myself in a state where it's conducive to you getting those answers, which is to take time, go for a walk, meditate, spend some time where you're asking yourself important questions without a lot of distraction. Some of those questions I mentioned today, but start to identify what's important to you. What are you the only of? When you're at your best, what are you doing? What's your enemy? What legacy do you want to leave with every day in your daily life? Start to ask what might look like profound questions. And, at first I remember when I started to write my blog, it just seemed so waffly, and it was like I was suddenly in a Miss World pageant. I like bunny rabbits and oceans and little chickens, yellow chickens. No, you care about everything positive in the world. But as you push on these things, you start to get a little bit more specific. And I think what you've got to do is you've got to interrogate your own language and not just go for an easy solve. You've got to say, well, what exactly do I want to address? And what exact skills do I want to bring to bear on it? And what exact impact am I trying to have? And so firstly, acknowledge that it's a difficult process. Secondly, create the conditions that allow you to be successful. And then thirdly, externalize yourself. And I guess what I'm saying in a larger sense is trust the process. I was an absolute idiot when I stumbled through it, just because I had no idea what was going on. And it was circumstances beyond my control that created those conditions for things to emerge. But now, having been around this space for 10 years and seen a lot of incredible thought leaders doing work in and around this area, these are important elements of the process. So then trust the process and it will emerge. So I hope that helps. Dana, does purpose have to mean you're doing good? Can't you just do something functional? That's an interesting question. Sometimes I get that. I was actually out somewhere speaking at an event not long ago, and it was an industrial B2B company. And I was talking about purpose, and they were like, well, we do purpose. We haul materials from one place to another. That's our purpose. And I drew a distinction between purpose as a utility, a function, and purpose as an aspiration or impact. And I think what we're talking about here is really a legacy that you're going to leave, a purpose, which is why you exist. I mean, in strict terms, your purpose is why you exist, and it should be meaningful to your head, to your heart, and to your hands. It should be an active verb that inspires and makes you want to do something rather than something purely functional. It should be something that is, the world is going to be left a little better off because you're living your truth. You're living your purpose. So your purpose is why you exist. What else? The company I work for isn't necessarily a purposeful company, yet so much of my life and welfare is derived from there. How do I bring some of my purpose into a work environment that might not support it? That's interesting. Many times when we go into companies, they might have an internal champion that wants the company to be purposeful. There may be lead stakeholders inside the company that want the company to build a culture of purpose or have a positive impact. But invariably, there's a challenge. There's leadership who haven't bought in, a CFO who doesn't understand why it's more than a nice to have. So we come across this a lot. You need to lead with a conversation that they want to have. And what do I mean by that? If you go in there and say, you need to be purposeful because it's the right thing to do, companies will more often than not, yes you to death. They'll say, yep, that sounds great. We can't afford it right now. It's not a priority. but we're a big believer in the same things. Thanks very much. Leave it with us. And it won't happen. Instead, you need to align the impact you want to have with the business goals of the company, because I deeply believe that profit and purpose are two sides of the same coin. And I believe that because today we have a heightened awareness of the compounding global crises we face, like climate change. We've got younger demographics, millennials and Gen Z, your employees and customers that want brands to do good. And you've got connected technologies like social media that keep everyone very well informed. And so you can go in there and make the business case and say, well, company X, B2B or B2C, we want to reach someone, or our business needs to build communities in this area, or we need to expand the top of our sales funnel this way, or whatever it might be. And you can make a very compelling business case that one of the most important ways to do that is align around shared values and work towards a common goal. And so if you can say, we are trying to reach this market, and this market cares about these things, and we as a company stand for X, Y, and Z, we could do these sorts of activations that would reach those people, and they would be engaged with our brand and our products and services to achieve a common goal. And so if the company isn't that engaged in and around purpose, then you need to make the business case for it. The second thing you can do is unlock their competitive instincts. So you can show what their competitors are doing. Invariably, in almost every industry, you've got leaders being more purposeful, whether they're doing it to mitigate risk, whether they're doing it to build their reputation, whether they're doing it to win the talent they need to grow. They are being purposeful. And you can show the other companies out there that are doing it. And that can unlock the competitive instinct. And then finally, there's so much research and data now to support all this work. From Ernst & Young and Harvard Media and Cone Communications and Edelman and Gallup. So you can really make a compelling business case as to why this is important. So don't lead with your need. Don't lead with what you want to get them to do, which is be purposeful in a sense, but rather back out of what they want to achieve, which is they want to reach certain demographics and so on. And it's not being duplicitous or disingenuous about it, but rather, the very way you drive growth or profit today is by being purposeful, is by showing up in a way that will be meaningful to those stakeholders. So they're actually two sides of the same coin. Let's have a look at another one. Can two people have the same purpose? Don't think I've ever got that question before. Can two people have the same purpose? Yes, they can, in a sense, I guess in the abstract, but I don't think any two people are alike. I have met countless folks working in the purpose space who are fantastic and so good at what they do, but the way they manifest it is unique to their journey, is unique to their skill set, is unique to their team, is unique to their marketplace, is unique to their goals, their aspirations. So I don't think two people, they could have the same purpose, but I think if you interrogated it a bit further, you'd probably find that they would frame different language and ultimately it would be different. They may be trying to impact the same category, the same cause, the same issue, but the way it will show up when the rubber hits the road will be slightly different. Katie, it's easy for big companies to have a purpose, but why is it important when you're just trying to get your first product out? That's a great question. I was told the other day, 67% of new jobs in America come from small businesses, which blows my mind. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, it blows my mind. So all of the founders and social entrepreneurs out there who are starting their own business, they're doing extraordinary work. And I understand that for many people, it's just working out your kitchen table, getting your MVP, your first product out the door, raising your first bit of money from friends and family, or maybe a Series A of funding. And that can be extremely demanding. But here's what we discover. Pretty soon over time, if you've only got a product-only focus, you will say one thing about one product, one thing about the next product, one thing on this channel, one thing on another channel. And then ultimately over time, you end up broadcasting your schizophrenia at people. You're saying all these different things across different channels. And that begs the question, how do I connect the dots? And it's far more effective in our mind to define your purpose in the first place and let that inform your business and position your products as social proof of that purpose. And if you're a small company, you're a solopreneur or a founder, your personal purpose is effectively the company purpose. I mean, you are shaping it. 100%. And as I said about Blake Mycoskie and Sir Richard Branson, you know, you still feel that today when these companies are large and successful. Jordan, how do you adjust for life-changing events with regard to your purpose, empty nest, career change? Ooh, that's interesting. My wife and I are preparing for empty nest. We have a 19 and a 16-year-old, and where part of us is like, and then part of us is like, ooh, what do we do now? So the interesting thing is the purpose ideally stays the same. How it shows up can evolve over time. So I would say when we first were started, I was spending all my time writing blog posts and then doing a little bit of consulting and then the book and speaking. Now we're much more into the consulting side and so on. So I think, you know, it gets calibrated over time. And I think that can be a function of different life events. So if you have more time, you could write another book. If you, you know, your empty nest, you can travel more and speak more. But the purpose is the through line. You know, I think Richard Branson's, I don't have it in front of me, is to make mistakes and have fun, to learn from mistakes and have fun doing it, which I think is extraordinary. He doesn't talk about what he does. He's just constantly in the risk business and learning from those mistakes and having fun doing it. And, you know, I think that's, you know, accurately captures the spirit of the person as well and the spirit of the company. So I think, you know, you just come out of the gate strong in alignment with who you are as a person, and then how that shows up will evolve over time with different life events, but the through line will be the same. I mean, Airbnb, to create a world where everyone can belong, is their purpose. But at one point, they're giving free accommodation to Syrian refugees. There's another point, they're giving accommodation to the victims of the Paris bomb attack. At another time, they're reaching out with open homes and they're asking hosts to volunteer their accommodation for free when people are victims of natural disasters. So these are all very different expressions of the same consistent purpose. Rachel, Rachel, what if I don't want to have a purpose? Rachel, what if I don't want to have a purpose? You know, that's fair enough too. I mean, sometimes it can seem lofty, I guess, or pretentious. I think in my experience, and maybe it's because I'm around a crowd that sort of interested in this sort of work, one of two things show up. People either have a positive desire for a purpose. I want to work it out. I want to make sure I'm making the best use of my time. I want to live a life of meaning. And some people do that at age 20. Some people do it at 15. I mean, these kids and TEDx talks, you know, with kids and things, you're just like, oh my God, these children are prodigies. And some people don't come to it till very, very late in life. The other side is we find that even if you're not consciously looking to define your purpose, you're unhappy or you're envious or you're frustrated or you're discontent or you're restless because you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. And obviously that can be very, very difficult if you've got a sort of utilitarian job, which is sort of doesn't give of itself provide an opportunity to have an impact. But then you can do it in after hours, or you can do it on weekends, or you can work with your company to start to do something that has, you know, a positive give back. So there's always one. But, you know, I would ask you, if you don't want to have a purpose, are you content with where you are right now? And if so, that's great. You probably found something that you find fulfilling, or maybe you don't want fulfillment. Maybe that doesn't float your boat, and that's fine too. But by and large, my experience is that at some point in life, people are looking for the reason they're here and what makes life meaningful. Eli, what do you do if your mind is stuck and you just can't seem to get clarity? If your mind is stuck and you can't get clarity, I think you need to give yourself permission to be stuck. I think you need to sort of say, that's okay. And I'll tell you, like, I've been married 26 years. And early in the days of the relationship, I'd always try and fix things because things had to be just so and da-da-da-da. Now I've learned over time, you just need to let things be as they are and let them shake out, because often it's not necessarily to do with you or to do with both of you, or it might be other circumstances. In the same way, if you're stuck, I think there's an opportunity to just be okay with that and sit with that. And if you really wanted to be a little bit proactive about it, you can ask yourself, well, what are you stuck on? What is it you're stuck about? And is there an issue that you're stuck on? Is it an emotion? Is it the importance of even doing this sort of work? I think an obstacle can often be as telling as, a solution. And it's just part of the process, just part of the process. I want to have a purpose, but don't feel I'm the best speaker, writer, or thought leader. What are other things I could do to live my purpose and encourage others to make an impact? That's a great question. There are so many different ways that we can all show up. You can write blog posts about something you care about. You can volunteer on the weekend. You can share content about a cause that you care about. You can develop a product or be part of an innovation engine that is trying to solve for a problem that doesn't have a solution yet. You can form a team at work that champions certain issues internally. So there's so many different things that you could do. You can donate, to causes you care about. So all of this is to say, here's the thing I've learned. And again, learned it the hard way. I didn't, come to this clearly myself. I used to think fulfillment came from the outside in. When I was working on Nike and you'd win shiny statues of the advertising business, it was validation to some degree. But I used to think that outside in would fill you up. They're filling you up. Look, you're great. Isn't that great? What I've realized since then is that fulfillment is an inside job. It's what you give of yourself to others that fills you up. You fill yourself up by giving to others, by contributing to something larger than yourself. You give of yourself to others, and that's what fills you up. And so, this gift of life that we talk about, I think it's not given to you. It's given for you to give to somebody else. I think the gift of life is something that you pass on. And I think if you want true fulfillment, the more you give to others, the greater fulfillment you'll find for yourself. And, I've really seen this play out, whether it's, having got to know Scott Harrison at Charity Water or spoken at an event before President Clinton. And just really, I've been lucky enough to observe some people who've had real impact close up. And the thing that they've really cottoned onto is that all the stuff that goes with it, I mean, I'm sure it's nice to some degree and so on, but they've sort of got off themselves. They're over themselves and they're onto the issue or the difference they want to make in the world. And I think that's the goal that they've all come to. I see that in all of them. I see it across the board. And they're very appreciative and grateful for the attention and for the adulation sometimes. But I also always see in their eyes that that's not what it's about for them. It's not what it's about. And, the polarity of the communication is from them giving to somebody else. It's not getting from others. Craig, how do you know when you've achieved your purpose? Oh, wow, that's interesting. I think there are milestones all along the way. Like for me, there might have been a book or, being a successful speaker or whatever it might be. But I think there are milestones. And as we touched on before, how your purpose shows up over time will change. And it will be informed by life events like empty nest or an illness in the family or whatever it might be, because that defines what you can do. But I would set some pretty interesting goals. Like, at the We First here, the team, we set goals and we work towards them. And right now that looks like a new website or whatever it might be. That does a better job of enlisting the interest of clients to help them become more purposeful and so on. It can take any form. But if you look at the landscape of purpose out there as in sort of traditional terms, you can be a speaker, you can be an author, you can be a trainer, you can be a blogger, you can be an influencer, you can be a donor, you can be a volunteer, you can be an incubator. There's just so many different roles that you can play. And what it unlocks in you in terms of passion is absolutely extraordinary. It really is transformative in your life. And you will look back afterwards and go, wow, how could I not have been doing this before? Randy, if you're an older consultant and it's challenging to find work anyway, how can you find business opportunities with purpose-driven companies or agencies? Well, as cool as it is to be young these days, there is wisdom in those older consultants. And I think there's a number of different ways it can show up. You could focus on working with the executives, C-suite level, because you've got the same sort of seniority and experience. You could work with larger legacy brands that typically would want someone more senior or older, like the P&G and J&Js of the world, these large companies, as opposed to young, nimble companies. You can be a mentor to founders who are looking for someone who's run the miles and has the experience and so on. So it's not a function of backing out of those marketplace opportunities, but rather, where is your strength? Where is your purpose? Do you want to be a mentor to the next generation of young leaders? Do you want to be a partner to the leaders of the top companies today, the largest companies out there? Do you want to transform companies by working with them on building cultures of purpose? There's lots of different ways in, but I would encourage you to, Randy, to live your truth, and to make sure that you do what would be most fulfilling for you, because then you'll offer the greatest value. I know we have a few more questions, but you can fire away and I can still answer those via email. If you are passionate about working out what your purpose is and want to be guided through this process, do take a look at wefirstworks.com. The courses are specifically designed to distill all the work that we do down to something that's very manageable. It's step by step. You're guided all the way through it. You've got these incredible folks who are leaders in their field, training you along with the folks at WeFirst. And it's solely designed to make you successful. It's solely designed to help you work out what your purpose is, so that when we all look back, we can go, wow, we are a force for good. Our purpose is really to leverage the power of storytelling to help business become a force for good. And, this is to that end. So I would encourage you to do that, because it'll really make what could otherwise be a somewhat intangible process very structured and easy to follow, with clear outputs that are actionable. And that's the main thing. And, just on a personal note, I think working out what your purpose is one of the most powerful things you can do in your life. I think, I'm 52. I was actually my birthday yesterday, 52. So I'm on the wrong side of young. And when you look back, you do, especially if you have kids or you've kind of played a role in other people's lives, you look back and you go, well, I want to make sure that there was a point to it all. And the more you give of yourself to others, the greater fulfillment you'll find. And that's been a miraculous epiphany for me after I chased my tail all around, Australia and London and the US, living all these versions of success that really weren't true to who I am or the contribution I wanted to make. So I would encourage you to give yourself the gift of doing this work and to show up in a way that's most meaningful to you. It'll transform your relationships in your life. It will unlock serendipity that you never could have imagined, and you'll look back with far greater satisfaction as to how you spend your time. So I really hope it helps. Thank you for all the great questions today. Thanks for some time on a Monday morning, and we'll speak to you soon.